So, basically, as we've already explored, this notion of movement integration is growing internationally, and there are essentially three components of it. There are active breaks or activity breaks, where physical activity is used as a standalone activity. There are curriculum-focused activity breaks, so short bouts of activity that tend to include curriculum content. And then there are physically active lessons, which are those that integrate the movement into the existing curricula in key learning other than in PE. And what we've sort of done is trawl through the literature and really notice that in pretty much all of the literature there is a missing voice, and that missing voice is the voice of the pupils. And this happens a lot in sort of policy implementation. Everyone talks to those up there, and nobody talks to teachers, and nobody ever talks to kids. And this is pretty much the same thing. So within this presentation, what we wanted to do was to showcase some really fancy and novel interactive methods that we use to elicit the voice of young people. And then the second was purely to explore their perceptions of traditional and physically active lessons. This was done in one rural primary school, and it was an aspect of a broader intervention. But what we did was we worked with a Year 5 group and a Year 6 group. So the Year 5 group were the intervention group, the lucky group, and the Year 6 group, I don't want to suggest they were unlucky, but the Year 6 group just carried on as normal. And within that, what we did, we used two particular techniques to try and elicit their perspectives. The first one we used was a write and draw technique. And we used that because drawing, kids love to draw, in theory. It's more inclusive, it's equitable and fair for young people. And it provided them with a great opportunity to express themselves than if it was just sat in a room talking to a random guy they've never met before, who also brings puppets into the room with them, which can be a little bit off-putting for some kids. Don't run DBS check, so we're all good. And what it did is it followed the write and draw method, write, draw, show and tell that Noonan et al. Talked about in 2016. And so what we did was we encouraged them to draw, first off, just a typical classroom lesson. So go in, pens, paper, crayons, whatever you wanted, draw your typical normal classroom lesson for them. And then we would use that in follow-up conversations. And the other thing that we did was we took in some puppets. Primary school kids love puppets, especially if they're sort of 9, 10, 11, 12. Well, not 12, primary school. But we used the puppets to try and elicit their responses, and what we did was we used a combination of a variety of different puppet interviews and focused on one called the alien puppet interview. And the alien puppet interview basically is where you give them a puppet that looks like an alien, and you say, right, here's your puppet, give them a name, give them a persona, give them a character. They've come from Mars, or wherever else you fancy, and they know nothing about primary school. They know nothing about lessons in primary school, so with your puppet, we want to explore that. And they were given three choices. They could respond directly to their puppet, so they give their puppet a name, real great names like Dave, Bruno, real alien names. So it was right, child talking directly to their puppet, or they spoke directly to me as the interviewer and just left their puppet, just played with it and made a squeaky noise with the tongue that they do, or they spoke through their puppet to me. So they really took on the persona of Dave or Bruno, told me about their journey to this planet, how great it was, and then started to explain what they thought about classroom lessons. So by a combination of these two methods, we were able to elicit the voice of young people and get a perspective on what they thought about traditional classroom lessons, and then what they thought about physically active lessons as well. There is a quick warning with this, that if you love primary schools, and you love what goes on in primary schools, please look away now, but don't be offended. These are not my words. These are the words of primary school, Year 5 and Year 6 pupils, and no one can ever be mad at kids. So, in essence, we engaged with 47 pupils across Year 5 and Year 6, and the majority of the responses that came out were the very traditional responses, right? It's around, these are not their words obviously, but it was around didactic delivery, and this notion of rote learning. They're very intelligent Year 5 and Year 6 kids. And they talked a lot about the way that those classroom lessons reinforced rules and were used as sort of a form of behaviour management. So I'll give you some examples. So one year 5 boy said, I've drawn a normal lesson, we sat down, the teacher is chatting away at the front. So that very didactic approach. A normal classroom lesson is where you work independently, no speaking. You do your work properly, no messing about. Or, in my drawing, I'm trying to go along with what the teacher says and don't talk. Very restrictive, very focused, no messing about, no talking. Don't even think about having fun. All right? More importantly, as a result of that, setting the context, they also talked about being very bored in very sedentary, often prolonged seated lessons. They talked about clock watching, and they talked about feeling lazy. So they said, it's boring, you never get to move around, you sit down, look at a piece of paper, and then do boring work. And that was across a range of lessons. It wasn't specific to maths or English, it was across a range of lessons. I've got a picture of someone thinking, 3 more hours to go till home time. And there were lots of pictures of that. Sometimes lessons can be boring because most of the time we're sitting down in your chair just listening to the teacher talk all the time with a sheet of paper to write answers on. Sounds like university. When you're sat down, you're just like, ugh. You're just lazy and you don't handwrite as neat because you get lazy. Alright, so these are the perceptions of traditional classroom lessons. So these have implications not just for us as physical activity practitioners, but for education in general. Right? That we are putting kids off learning purely through our delivery. And there are some drawings to highlight it. The majority of drawings, they were sat down, this is blah blah blah, there's a teacher, they've obviously put a lot of effort into drawing the teacher, and this is a clock watching one, so I'm not sure what she's thinking of there. I think that's food, that's riding a bicycle, and that is sleep. And the other one I've no idea. Alright, but that reinforced some of the items that came up in the qualitative responses. Afterwards, after the Year 5 group had had their intervention and they'd experienced physically active lessons for a prolonged period of time, we did the same again. We got them to draw their lessons, we brought the puppets back in, we spoke to them and said, right, talk to us now about a normal classroom lesson. And this was way down the line, it wasn't immediately after classroom lesson, it was further down the line. And they highlighted 2 initial things. One was the changing role of the teacher, and 2 was this notion of increased social interaction. So they talk about, well, normally we have 10 minutes and she, the teacher, tells us what to do, and then we get on and do it. So greater autonomy. She, the teacher, even, finds it really boring sitting there, so when we do the lessons, we're moving around, we're talking, we're learning a bit quicker. They think they're learning quicker just because they're moving around. It's better because you're not always sat in the same place, you're not always with the same people all the time. So if you're sat at that desk, you're working with the same individuals, and they don't get choice over who they work with. Whereas when they're moving about, they're better able to interact with other individuals and they can talk to people they like to talk to. When you're up and about moving around with different people, it's fun. Right? So immediately they've talked about how the classroom is set up differently, there's a different role from the teacher's perspective, they have more ownership over what they're doing, the teacher takes a backward step in that particular context. And then more importantly, they highlighted a range of benefits. So a lot of them talked about, after you've moved about, you can concentrate more. A very prominent theme, you can definitely concentrate more after you've been moving about. I feel like standing up is a good thing because it burns energy and you're not fidgety in your chair. And a lot of them spoke about when you're sat down, when you're feeling lazy and bored, you start to get fidgety. And just being able to alleviate that by standing up and moving around was vital for them. Being active makes your brain bigger. So these clever kids who know what didactic teaching is are able to tell us that moving around helps them with their brain development. In fact, what they talked about was, actually, it doesn't make your brain bigger, but it gets you warmed up for what you're about to go and do. And finally, they also talked about, and I thought this was a little bit harsh, but basically, harsh but fun, that's why I included it. If you're overweight and really dumb, you can get fit and learn at the same time. So there's a range of benefits that children perceive from engaging in physically active lessons beyond just the added element of learning. And there's a drawing post, right? And you can see that the desks are in there, the chairs are in there, but nobody sat at them. And I probably should have blanked out the teacher's name, but I didn't have time late last night. So, in terms of the implications, Do we need to consider how we teach in general? Yes, we probably do. It's a broader issue than just physically active learning. It's an education-wide issue. Secondly, primary school kids are smarter than we think, as I've alluded to. So do we need to consider pupil voice in design and planning of interventions? And thirdly, there are additional benefits to physically active learning and physically active lessons that should be promoted to key stakeholders and decision makers, other than just good for your health, more physical activity, and better attainment targets. Because social interaction, developing a range of other transferable skills that might be beneficial, that might get more people on board. And finally, you'll like my last slide because it's basically blank. Next steps. We need more. We need, from a research perspective, we need more pupil voice. We need more about their experiences of active lessons, active breaks, whatever it is, so that, and I've spoken to teachers, I know that if teachers think students love it, they're on board. And this surely demonstrates that the kids love it when they're not just sat at their desk all the time. So, we need more. That's for everyone. Thank you.